Hello and welcome to the Construction Record Podcast. I'm digital media editor Warren Fry. On January 7th, 1981, a fly form on the then under construction Bentall building collapsed. Carpenters Gunther Couvreux, Brian Stevenson, Davis and Yrjo Mitrunen fell 36 floors to their deaths. On January 6th, as in previous years, a memorial was held to celebrate their lives, remember others who have died or have been injured at their workplace, and stress the vital importance of occupational safety practices. I attended the event and I spoke to Dan Strand, the Director of Prevention Field Services for WorkSafeBC, about the current state of construction safety and his organization's role as BC's safety regulator.
And I'd like to start with one thing you mentioned during the event was that people have to report, essentially, or at least be self-aware as to what's going on in their workplace. And that doesn't just go for employees, I'm sure, it's employers as well.
The aspect of recognizing within workplaces the hazards that exist and the risks and taking those seriously and putting controls around them, training your workers, this is all paramount. It's kind of safety 101, but we need to ensure workers are empowered to raise their hand and have their voice heard, and frankly employers to also put it out there that we need to hear from you and we need to have this conversation about health and safety. It's imperative to ensure a sustainable approach for occupational health and safety.
And another thing you touched on was that, and I've heard this before at various seminars, that WorkSafeBC for 2023 and kind of going forward has more of a roadmap as to certain topics they're going to be focusing on. But what are those topics?
Well, again, within our construction sector specifically, which continues to be the highest driver of injury rates and serious injury rate and fatalities, we're going to focus on falls from elevation. Like falls from ladders continue to plague that industry, and we want to be vigilant to ensure there's a focus on that. High voltage electricity and contacts with and all the construction going on in the downtown, there's still a potential to contact these high voltage lines, and that's a problem. We talk about this ongoing and pervasive musculoskeletal injury issues. They still exist, and lo and behold, what might we do around that to examine the work activities, put controls in place again, and to ensure that doesn't happen. So we're also focused on tower cranes, and so the erection dismantling of tower cranes, and as we know, and we'll hear more in short order about the outcome of the investigation into the Kelowna crane collapse. As well, we have a dedicated team focused on occupational disease and asbestos specifically. And so as those regulations around certification licensing come to fruition, we'll be ensuring that there's uptake on those important matters as well. So that's construction. We also, though, at the same time look into healthcare and manufacturing and forestry, and it's there's lots of activities out there, but the basic premise is the same. Start the conversation, examine the workplace, put the controls in place, train your workers, treat them with respect, and we're all going to be in a better place.
You also touched on in your speech about bullying not specifically bullying, but attitudes on site, and construction it's getting better, but it's got a rep for that. So maybe you could
There's
speak
work
to that.
to be done.
Yeah.
There's work to be done with respect to the attitudes and behaviors on any site, and so bullying and harassment and violence in the workplace are totally unacceptable. They are from WorkSafe's perspective, but they need to be within these construction settings and such. And you're right, there is movement to be made in a positive direction, but that then again becomes how we communicate and how we treat people is paramount in any industry, and construction is doing better. They're recognizing that. There's even business imperative that it's hard to hire people and retain them if there's going to be those kinds of attitudes. So be alive to the fact that you won't operate if you don't have those respectful behaviors.
And finally, Brynn Bourke of the BC Building Trade, she pointed out that I think it was 30 or maybe 32 people per year, and that number doesn't seem to be going down, and WorkSafeBC would be the people to address that.
Well, you never really want to talk about deaths going up and down and all the rest of it as sort of some sort of barometer
stat,
it's a stat and it's numbers, and one is too many, but on one hand, and now I'll kind of play into sort of an employer's perspective, is that we're at unprecedented levels of construction activity. And so if you suggest that there's thousands and tens of thousands of more construction workers, statistically you'll kind of see that they're maybe it is safer actually, even but I don't like to kind of use those numbers in these 20s and 30s and say that we're doing good or worse because one is too many.
Exactly.
So I think we just have to focus on the fact that look in the mirror, take responsibility, take action for health and safety. These are numbers that remind us, and this event reminds us of the importance that you do not want this to happen in your workplace. And just to refocus yourself and get ready for a year and be comfortable raising your hand. And if you raise your hand on a work site and you're not getting the response that you think you need to, if you go to your joint committee and it's just not feeling right, WorkSafeBC is always available 24/7 to have this conversation too. So we have powers and we have responsibilities and we have an ability to make change, but we can't be everywhere, so we would suggest we empower workers everywhere to just feel comfortable that we got your back, but put your hand up.
Okay, great, thank you.
Up next, Journal of Commerce staff writer Evan Saunders spoke to Lee Loftus, who is a retired union activist and currently sits on WorkSafeBC's board of directors.
What does it mean for you after all these years to still see this event happening and to ensure that it's happening every year?
Well, it means to me that the issue is still alive, that construction is still dangerous. People acknowledge that. It allows us to remember that tragic morning, tragic afternoon, actually. It reminds us that there's work to be done, and even though we made changes, we need to revisit those changes to make sure that they're useful today.
Yeah. I guess the more an event like this happens, at the one point that it's positive to be memorializing, it also references the fact that these dangers are still very present.
Yeah, if you think about the reports and the commissions that arose out of this terrible tragedy, the Kayak Commission put together a report. We made changes to scaffolding. We made changes to formwork. We made changes to health and safety program. We made all kinds of changes. We've become too comfortable with those changes.
Yeah.
And this reminds me every year that we need to go back and talk about the effectiveness of health and safety, communications on the workplace, ensuring that the systems that we're using and the designs are compatible, not like what happened here, because the design and the systems in place were put together and not compatible, and that's what the false form came off the top of the roof as a result of. So we need to make sure we're still doing the right stuff.
Being thorough, being proactive about these things, not waiting for the next tragedy to let us know what's wrong.
Yeah, I don't want to be standing in another memorial.
Yeah.
I don't want to be standing in front of another coffin. I don't want to be sitting in front of another family telling them their loved ones are gone because we haven't done our work. This is important.
Very nice. Very well said. I completely agree. And let's make some changes. Still the most dangerous industry in Canada.
It's the most dangerous. I hate getting into competition with what's dangerous. Forestry is dangerous. Construction is dangerous. If you take a look what's happening in healthcare is dangerous, and the violence and all the pieces going in there. We have more fatalities than we need. We don't need to lose life every year. If it was any other type of industry, people would be up in arms about the loss of life. And it's people become too comfortable with how many people leave us every year. So these things are important.
Yeah, it's that danger of statistics versus keeping the emotional idea alive.
Very much so.
Yeah, very nice. So. Very well said.
All right, thank you.
Very nice to meet you.
My pleasure.
Evan also spoke to Brian Stevenson's sister-in-law Diane Stevenson and his older brother Bruce Stevenson about speaking at the event and their memories of Brian.
I was just wondering, for you, how was the memorial this year back in person after a couple COVID years?
Well, it's been wonderful. I mean, to see the turnout. I mean, these flowers are unbelievable, and just to read, all of the people who have brought them, donated them. And to look up there when you're up there and you look back and see all the people. It was a very warm tribute.
It's my first time. I'm new to the city, and I hadn't learned about the Bentall tragedy until just when I was being informed that this event was happening.
Oh, okay.
And as I'm sure you guys know, anytime you learn about something new like this, it feels like it happened this morning. So once again, really sorry for your loss. I was wondering if, thinking about, it was your brother, am I correct?
My brother.
Your brother? Oh, your brother-in-law.
I'm just a sister-in-law.
Very nice.
She's the talker.
Was wondering if maybe you guys, and obviously, best case scenario, this never happened, right? But looking at the positive change that has come in this continuous memorial to reinforce that, how do you think your brother-in-law, might have reacted to seeing that he left that impact?
It's hard to say.
It's that. Well, he'd be overwhelmed.
Yeah, he'd be, he worked on the 37th floor or whatever it was, and he was always into safety, and he was the junior guy. He was an apprentice, and he had looked up to Don and Gunther and Yrjo for their guidance, and he went along with them, I guess, and unfortunately they all fell to their death. So.
And what the difference would have been? I mean, he was strong. He is an apprentice, but outspoken, and he would have if he'd known if there'd been any inkling, that they would have. He would have stood for something like that. But his own, as a carpenter, I mean, he and Bruce were planning on going into side business, doing carpentry and woodworking on their own. You missed that opportunity of being a close.
Of course.
I mean, he was he was only 12 when we got married, so it was like, okay, he was just like a kid brother that I never had, and we were very close. So.
I'm really sorry for your loss once again, and if you're not comfortable answering this, just wondering if you could maybe tell me a little bit about your brother. What was he like?
Well, he was the youngest in the family.
Yeah.
I was the second oldest, and he got more opportunities than I did because he was the youngest.
I understand. I'm the second born. The youngest is pampered, and a blind eye is often turned, right?
Yeah. We got all the heck. He got all the glory.
Exactly.
But he, real outgoing guy. He didn't have to train, but he went to the Edmonton Commonwealth Games and was ready to break some records.
He was competing?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, what was his sport?
Sprinting.
Oh, wow, nice.
Yeah, but he, unfortunately, when he was there, he pulled a muscle and was laid out. It was over for him. But he held records at Kitsilano High School.
Wow, nice.
So,
I live in Kitsilano now. He grew up in Kitsilano?
Yep.
Very nice.
19th and Trafalgar area.
Well, very nice to meet you guys. My condolences for your loss, of course. And thank you for making yourselves available to reinforce how important it is to make those steps forward.
It's the least
nice chatting to you.
Least
Take
we
care.
can do.
Very nice to meet you.
Brian.
Very nice. Nice to meet you guys.
Thank you.
Finally, I spoke to Brynn Bourke, who's the executive director of the BC Building Trades, about ways to improve work conditions and address not only physical dangers, but mentally safe work environments as well.
And I'd just like to touch on what you talked about during the ceremony. You said that, well, you listed off, don't know the exact number, you do, of how many people have died since 1981, since
1,141.
Yeah, and you said there was 32 people per year, and that number doesn't seem to be going down. So you could talk to that.
Last year, 30 construction workers lost their lives from trauma or exposure. And the year before that, it was 28. And before that, it was 30. And the number has been horribly, predictably, around 30 workers every year.
And you said that you wouldn't be surprised if that happened next year at the ceremony. Maybe we can speak to how this can be mitigated if it can.
That number represents two different kinds of injuries. One is trauma, and the other is exposure. And so, we're calling for changes to improve safety that involve increasing the number of inspections, requiring training so that workers are skilled and qualified to perform work safely, and also changes like regulations requiring the licensing of asbestos abatement contractors to limit the number of exposures, and taking sort of that full scope approach to get in front of preventing trauma injuries and also exposure events for workers.
And you also, WorkSafeBC is the regulatory body. BC Building Trades is, you advocate, but what else do you do for safety concerns with your members and otherwise?
Well, we see it as our role to be the workers' voices for safety on the job. And that comes right from the job site and the work that our unions do through their health and safety councils, through their stewards, feeding that information up to our unions and to me, so I can speak out and we can get in front of, sanitation is a major concern on construction sites, enforcing protections around fall from heights, but also when workers are injured, we have a worker advocate on our staff who advocates for workers and really tries to make sure that injured workers not only have fair compensation, but they have access to a full suite of supports that are going to help them return to work safely and be able to, perform, have supports to do that well.
The next thing I was going to ask is, I was just talking to Dan from WorkSafeBC, and one of the things he emphasized was that people, if they're in like a bullying situation or just a toxic environment, they have to advocate for that. I would assume being in a union addresses some of that, but do you see an improvement of that in general in the industry?
Well, I think we know that claims suppression is something that takes place, and there's legislation before the legislature right now that actually is one of the pieces of that is to deal with ensuring that employers do not intimidate workers from advocating for their rights or for filing a claim if they feel that they've been injured on the job, including if they've been bullied. But I want to make sure we don't fall into blaming workers for safety on the job and thinking that making work safe is about only workers working safely. Right. And while that is a part of it, and as workers, we take this event to recommit ourselves to safe workplaces and working safely. There is also an entire culture in construction that we are trying to shift to make it safer, to make it psychologically and physically safer, and to hold contractors accountable and create a culture among contractors where they feel they will be held accountable if they don't have safe work sites.
And I guess that's where, and there's plenty of government representation here, or there was, that's where legislating and government comes in. They also have a role in this, kind of the final one, really.
Well, they do. WorkSafeBC is administering the Workers' Compensation Act. And so that safety is constantly evolving. And we talked about some of the significant changes that have been made in construction from 1981 to today. But still much more work to do, and we can see and identify, on chronic pain that there, where we need to be taking the next steps on asbestos. Much more work to do.
And I guess finally, having the families here puts a human face on this. It's easy to say that happened, it's history, but it isn't. We have people right in front of us that went through it and continue to go through it to this day, really. So maybe you could speak to how you've gotten to know the families really over these years.
I cannot say enough about the incredible courage that the families have and have maintained for the last 42 years. As advocates, this ceremony would not be happening if not for them. The construction inquiry would not have happened if not for them. And I am grateful that they share their grief so publicly with us, because I think it does make it real. And when we say a number like 1,141 workers have died since January 7th, 1981, that number it's hard to wrap your head around it until you meet, one of the families from Bentall or their kids. And the magnitude, you start to get a window into what that might look like and why it's so important. Bentall may not make the news cycle most days, but we keep that event alive and in the forefront of people's memories. And it really was one of the largest construction accidents in the history of British Columbia. And it should be something that folks, are aware of and know that it happened.
Okay, thanks very much, Brynn.
Thanks, Warren.
Thanks for listening to the Construction Record Podcast. You can read Evan's article about the memorial at canada.constructconnect.com/JOC. And you can listen to previous episodes of the Construction Record Podcast on Amazon Music, Apple Music, and Spotify.